Little boy begged bikers to save his mother from her abusive husband. Watch what they did. The Montana summer sun hung low over the small town of Deer Lodge, casting long shadows across Main Street. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, making the air thick and heavy. Tommy Patterson, a slight 8-year-old boy with sandy blonde hair and eyes too old for his age, sat on the curb outside Miller's General Store, his worn sneakers scraping against the concrete. His small hands clutched a crumpled dollar bill, the edges soft from being folded and unfolded countless times. His mother had given it to him that morning with trembling fingers and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Get yourself something sweet, baby," Sarah had whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of Derek's heavy footsteps upstairs, "and take your time coming back." Tommy knew what that meant. It always meant the same thing. The rumble of motorcycle engines interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see a group of bikers pulling into the parking lot across the street, their chrome machines gleaming in the afternoon light. There were 5 of them, leather vests adorned with patches, their faces weathered but not unkind. The lead rider, a massive man with a salt and pepper beard, cut his engine and surveyed the quiet street with the careful attention of someone who'd seen more than his share of trouble. His name was Marcus Bear Thompson, though Tommy wouldn't learn that until later. Bear had been riding these roads for 30 years, ever since he'd come back from Desert Storm, with scars both visible and hidden. The Veterans Motorcycle Club had saved his life when he'd thought there was nothing left to live for, and now he paid that forward wherever he could. "Look at that kid," muttered Jesse, the youngest of the group, a lean man in his 30s with tribal tattoos snaking up both arms. "He's been sitting there for over an hour." Bear had noticed. He always noticed. Children sitting alone with that particular kind of stillness, that watchful quality that came from learning to be invisible. He'd seen it before in war zones, in shelters, in the faces of kids who'd grown up too fast. "Let's get some coffee," Bear said, dismounting his bike with practiced ease. Inside, the group filed into Miller's, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully. Old Tom Miller looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Bear, didn't know you boys were coming through town." "Just passing through on our way to the Veterans Rally in Missoula," Bear replied, his deep voice carrying the rasp of a lifetime smoker who'd quit 10 years too late. "Thought we'd stop for a break." As they ordered their coffee, Bear positioned himself by the window where he could keep an eye on the boy. Tommy hadn't moved. His eyes were fixed on something in the distance, his small body tense as a coiled spring. "Tom," Bear said quietly, nodding toward the window. "That kid out there. You know him?" Tom Miller followed his gaze and his expression darkened. "That's Tommy Patterson, sweet kid. His mama, Sarah, works over at the diner on Route 12. Real hard worker, never complains, though." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Well, she married Derek Holloway about 2 years back. He works at the lumber mill when he feels like it, spends most of his time at Mickey's bar when he don't." The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Bear had heard stories like this before, had lived through his own father's rage as a child. He understood the language of silence, the things people didn't say in small towns where everyone knew everyone's business, but turned a blind eye out of fear or habit or both. "The boy okay?" asked Carmen, the only woman in their group, her dark eyes sharp with concern. She'd escaped an abusive marriage herself 15 years ago, had the restraining order and the scars to prove it. Tom Miller wiped down the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. "I honestly don't know. He comes in here sometimes, just sits outside, never causes trouble. Sometimes I give him a soda, but he always tries to pay. Polite kid. Too polite, if you know what I mean." Bear knew exactly what he meant. Children who'd learned to make themselves small, to never ask for anything, to be grateful for scraps of kindness because they knew how quickly kindness could turn to cruelty. The bell chimed again, and Tommy walked in, his movements careful and measured. He approached the counter with the practiced caution of someone navigating a minefield, his eyes downcast. "Mr. Miller," he said softly, placing the dollar bill on the counter. "Can I have a candy bar, please?" "Sure thing, Tommy. Which one you want? The boy's eyes flicked to the display, lingering on the chocolate bars before settling on a cheaper option. "The peppermint stick, please." Tom Miller reached for a candy bar instead, one of the expensive ones. "Tell you what, kiddo, this one's been sitting here too long. Consider it a favor taking it off my hands. You keep your dollar." Tommy's eyes widened. "I can't. I mean, my mom gave me—" "Your mom works hard, and I know she needs every dollar. This one's on the house." Tom's voice was firm but kind, leaving no room for argument. The boy's throat worked as he swallowed hard, his eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mr. Miller." As Tommy turned to leave, Bear made a decision. "Hey, kid." Tommy froze, his shoulders hunching as if expecting a blow. Slowly he turned around, his eyes still on the floor. "You like motorcycles?" Bear's voice was gentle, the same tone he'd used with traumatized soldiers, with wounded animals, with anyone who'd learned that the world was a dangerous place. Tommy's eyes lifted for the first time, a spark of genuine interest breaking through his careful mask. "Yes, sir. Want to see them up close? We've got some pretty cool rides out there." For a moment, pure longing crossed the boy's face, but then the mask slammed back down. "I should get home. My mum, oh, she'll worry." Bear saw it then, the quick glance at the clock on the wall, the calculation of how much time had passed, whether it was safe. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice easy. "Fair enough, but we'll be around town for a bit. If you ever want to talk bikes, you know where to find us." He paused, then added carefully, "Or if you ever need anything. Anything at all." Tommy's eyes met his for just a second, and in that second, Bear saw a desperation so profound it made his chest ache. Then the boy nodded once and hurried out the door, his candy bar clutched tight in his fist. Carmen moved to stand beside Bear at the window, watching as Tommy disappeared down the street. "That kid's in trouble." "Yeah," Bear agreed, his voice grim. "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" Back at home, Tommy climbed the porch steps with quiet precision, avoiding the third step that creaked. The house was a small ranch-style structure that had once been white but now wore a tired grey, the paint peeling like dead skin. The lawn was overgrown, dotted with Derek's beer cans and the rusted hulk of a truck that hadn't run in 3 years. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and something else, something darker that Tommy couldn't name, but always made his stomach clench. He could hear the television blaring in the living room, some afternoon talk show with people yelling at each other. His mother was in the kitchen, her back to him as she prepared dinner. Even from behind, Tommy could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she moved too carefully, like every motion hurt. "Mom," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Sarah turned, and Tommy's heart sank. Her left eye was swollen, the skin around it already darkening to purple. She'd tried to cover it with makeup, but the injury was too fresh, too severe. "Hey, baby," she said, forcing that same broken smile. "Did you have a nice time?" "Mom, your eye—" "I'm fine, Tommy. Just clumsy, you know me." Walked right into the cabinet door. The lie fell from her lips with practiced ease, the same lies she'd been telling for 2 years, to her boss, to the neighbors, to herself. Tommy wanted to scream that cabinet doors didn't leave hand-shaped bruises on throats, didn't make someone flinch at sudden movements, didn't explain why his mother sometimes limped or held her ribs when she thought he wasn't looking. But he'd learned long ago that pointing out the truth only made things worse. "Where's Derek?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Sleeping it off." She turned back to the stove, stirring something in a pot with mechanical motions. He had a rough day at work. Tommy doubted Derek had been at work at all, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he moved closer to his mother, pressing against her side in a silent gesture of comfort. Sarah's hand came down to rest on his head, her fingers trembling slightly as they smoothed his hair. "I love you, Tommy. You know that, right? More than anything in this world." "I love you too, Mom." They stood like that for a long moment, mother and son bound together by love and fear, and the desperate hope that tomorrow might somehow be different. Then the floorboards creaked overhead, and they both tensed. Derek was awake. The footsteps were heavy on the stairs, each thud making Tommy's heart race faster. Derek Holloway was not a large man, but he carried himself with the aggressive posture of someone always looking for a fight, his frame wiry and tense with barely contained rage. His face was perpetually flushed, whether from alcohol or anger or both, his eyes small and mean. "What the hell is that smell?" he demanded, stumbling into the kitchen. "You burning dinner again, Sarah?" "No, Derek, Don't talk back to me." His hand slammed down on the counter, making both Sarah and Tommy jump. "I work my ass off all day, and this is what I come home to. A house that smells like shit, and a useless wife who can't even cook." Tommy knew Derek hadn't worked that day, had probably spent it at Mickey's bar, drinking away the disability check that came every month from an injury at the mill that may or may not have been as serious as he claimed. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, Sarah said, her voice small. "Just like you like it." Derek's eyes landed on Tommy, and something ugly twisted across his face. "What are you looking at, boy?" "Nothing, sir." "Don't sir me. You think you're better than me? Little shit." He took a step toward Tommy, and Sarah immediately moved between them. "Derek, please. He's just a child." "A child? He's old enough to show some respect, old enough to know that when I'm talking, he makes himself scarce." Derek's breath was sour with alcohol and decay. "Get out of here, boy. Go to your room." Tommy didn't need to be told twice. He turned and fled, his footsteps quick but not running. Running made Derek angry, up the stairs to his small room. He closed the door quietly and pressed his ear against it, listening. The argument started almost immediately, Derek's voice rising, Sarah's pleading. Then came the sounds Tommy had learned to dread, the crash of dishes, his mother's cry of pain, the thud of a body hitting the wall. Tommy squeezed his eyes shut, his hands pressed over his ears, but he couldn't block it out. He never could. The violence seeped through the walls like poison, contaminating everything. When it finally went quiet, Tommy crawled under his bed, into the small space where he kept his few treasures. A photo of his real father who died in a car accident when Tommy was 3, a toy car his mother had bought him for his last birthday, and a notebook where he sometimes drew pictures of the life he wished he had. Tonight, he drew motorcycles. 5 of them, gleaming and powerful. And beside them, he drew the man with the kind eyes and the beard, the one who'd asked if he needed anything, anything at all. 3 days passed. 3 days of carefully watching the clock, of memorizing the patterns of Derek's moods, of his mother's increasingly elaborate excuses for the fresh bruises that seemed to bloom on her skin like dark flowers. On the 4th day, Tommy made a decision. It was Saturday morning, and Derek had left early for Mickey's bar, his truck spewing exhaust as it rattled down the street. Sarah had the day shift at the diner, which meant Tommy had a few hours alone. He grabbed his bike from the garage, an old red Schwinn with rust spots and a squeaky chain, and pedaled toward Main Street. His heart hammered in his chest. He'd never done anything like this before, never reached out for help. His mother had always taught him that their problems were private, that family business stayed in the family. But Tommy had also learned that sometimes what adults said and what was true were 2 different things. The Veterans Motorcycle Club was still in town. He'd seen them at the diner where his mum worked, had heard her mention that they were staying at the Motel 6 on the edge of town for a few more days before heading to their rally. Every morning they ate breakfast at the diner, and his mother always came home with slightly more tip money those days. "They're good men," she'd said quietly, counting the bills. "Real gentlemen, not like—" She'd never finished that sentence, but Tommy had understood. Now, pedaling toward the diner, Tommy's courage wavered. What if they didn't believe him? What if they told Derek? What if they made things worse? But then he thought of his mother's swollen eye, of the way she held her ribs, of the sounds through the walls at night. Things couldn't get much worse. The diner was a classic American roadside establishment, all chrome and red vinyl, with a neon sign that read "Rosie's" in cursive letters. Tommy parked his bike around the side and peered through the window. The bikers were there, occupying a large corner booth, their leather vests draped over the seats. They were laughing at something, their faces relaxed and open in a way Derek's never was. His mother was working, moving between tables with practiced efficiency. Even from outside, Tommy could see the careful way she carried herself, favoring her left side. She'd put on more makeup than usual, but the bruise on her cheek was still visible if you knew to look for it. Bear looked up and saw Tommy through the window. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition. Bear's expression grew serious. He said something to the others, then stood and walked out of the diner. Tommy's first instinct was to run, but Bear's voice stopped him. "Hey, Tommy!" The big man kept his distance, respecting the boy's space. "You okay?" Tommy's mouth opened and closed. All the words he'd practiced, all the careful explanations he'd prepared, vanished. Instead, tears began streaming down his face, silent and unstoppable. Bear crouched down, putting himself at eye level with the boy. "It's okay. You're okay. Take your time." "I need help," Tommy finally whispered. "My mom needs help." "Derek?" The boy nodded miserably. "He hurts her. All the time. And I can't. I'm too small. I can't stop him." The words came tumbling out now, faster and faster. "Last night he pushed her down the stairs and she said she fell, but she didn't fall, and her eye is hurt and her ribs, and she cries when she thinks I'm asleep and I don't know what to do." Bear's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists, but his voice remained calm, steady. "You did the right thing telling me. That took a lot of courage. Can you help her? Please, I don't have any money, but I can work. I can pay you back. I'll do anything." "Stop." Bear's voice was firm, but gentle. "First, you don't pay for help, not from us. Second, yeah, kid, we're gonna help, but I need to know something. Is your mom working today?" Tommy nodded. "Until 3. And Derek?" "At Mickey's bar. He'll be there until they close, probably." Bear stood up, his massive frame seeming even larger. "Okay. Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna go inside, have breakfast with your mom on her break. We're gonna take care of the bill. And tonight, we're gonna have a conversation with Derek." The fear shot through Tommy. "He has a gun in the bedroom and knives. He's told Mom that if she ever tries to leave, he'll kill her. He said he'll kill both of us." This information didn't seem to surprise Bear. Noted, but kid, guys like Derek, they're bullies. And bullies back down when someone stands up to them, especially when they're outnumbered. We've dealt with worse than Derek Holloway. What if you can't stop him? What if he gets mad? Bear placed a huge hand gently on Tommy's shoulder. "Tommy, I spent 20 years in the army. I faced down enemy combatants, insurgents, and IEDs. Carmen over there survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. Jesse was a Marine. We know how to handle threats, and we know how to protect people who need protecting." "But the police, have you tried calling the police?" Tommy's face fell. "Twice. They came and talked to Derek, and he was real nice to them, and they left, and then—" He didn't need to finish. Bear could imagine. "Yeah, small-town cops sometimes look the other way, especially if Derek's got buddies on the force." Bear's voice was hard. "But we don't look the other way, ever." Inside the diner, Bear gathered the group in the corner booth. Sarah approached nervously, her order pad in hand, clearly confused about why Tommy was with them. "Mrs. Holloway," Bear said respectfully, "can you take a break? Sit with us for a minute?" I'm working," she stammered, her eyes darting toward the kitchen where Rosie, the owner, was visible through the pass-through window. Rosie, a formidable woman in her 60s, with hair dyed an improbable shade of red, called out, "Take your break, Sarah. These boys are good customers." Sarah sat down, reluctantly, her hands twisting the dish towel she'd been carrying. Tommy slid in beside her, and she automatically put her arm around him, pulling him close. "Tommy told us about Derek," Bear said without preamble. Sarah's face went white, then red, her breath coming faster. "Tommy, you shouldn't have—" "Mrs. Holloway," Carmen interrupted gently, "we're not here to judge you. We're here to help. There's nothing to help with. My husband and I, we have our problems, but—" "Sarah," Bear's voice was firm but not unkind. Your boy came to us because he's scared. Because he watches his mother get hurt and he feels helpless, and because guys like Derek don't stop on their own. They escalate. Sarah's composure crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she quickly wiped them away, looking around the diner to see if anyone was watching. You don't understand. If he finds out I talk to anyone, he's threatened to kill you, Bear finished. Tommy told us, and I believe Derek made that threat. But here's the thing about men like Derek, they're cowards. They pick on people smaller than them, people who can't fight back. They don't do well when confronted by people who can. You don't know him, Sarah whispered. When he gets angry, he's like a different person. And he's careful. He never hits where it shows when I'm working. The police have been called, but they never find enough evidence. And Derek is so charming to them. And they know his uncle. His uncle? Jesse asked. Deputy Frank Holloway, Sarah said bitterly. Derek's uncle. He makes sure nothing ever sticks. The bikers exchanged glances. Corrupt cops made things more complicated, but not impossible. Okay, Bear said. Here's what we need from you. We need you to trust us. Can you do that? Sarah looked at Tommy, at his desperate, hopeful face, and then at the group of strangers who'd somehow become their lifeline. What are you going to do? We're going to have a conversation with Derek. Explain that his behavior needs to change, and that if it doesn't, there will be consequences. We're also going to document his threats and your injuries, build a case that even Deputy Holloway can't ignore. He won't listen. He'll just get angry. Let him get angry, Carmen said, her voice hard. Sarah, I've been where you are. I know what it's like to be trapped, to believe there's no way out. But there is. You just need people in your corner. Marcus, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. His voice carried the rasp of someone who'd seen combat. Ma'am, we've dealt with bad guys all over the world. Domestic abusers are bottom of the barrel. We know how to handle them. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her arm tightening around Tommy. Finally, she asked, what do you need me to do? First, take photos of every injury. Document everything. Dates, times, what happened. Second, when you get home tonight, pack a bag. Keep it hidden, but have it ready in case you need to leave quickly. Third, trust us to do what we do best. Which is, Bear's smile was wolfish, protect and serve. We took an oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Derek Holloway qualifies as a domestic enemy in my book. That evening, as the sun set over Deer Lodge, the Veterans Motorcycle Club made their preparations. They met in Jesse's motel room, maps and notes spread across the bed. Derek leaves Mickey's bar around 11, Jesse reported. Takes the back roads home, usually too drunk to drive straight, but somehow never gets pulled over. His uncle probably makes sure of that, Carmen muttered. We intercept him on the way home, Marcus suggested. Bear shook his head. Too isolated. We do this at his house, but we do it smart. Sarah and Tommy need to be somewhere safe, and we need witnesses, people who can back up our story if this goes sideways. I've got a friend who runs a women's shelter in Missoula, Carmen said. She can take Sarah and Tommy tonight, no questions asked. They'll be safe there. Good. As for witnesses, Bear thought for a moment. Tom Miller. Old Tom seems like the kind of guy who'd help. And Rosie from the diner, Jesse added. Did you see the way she looked at Sarah's bruises? She knows what's going on. Okay, Carmen, you coordinate with the shelter. Jesse, you talk to Rosie. Marcus, you're with me. We're going to pay a visit to old Tom and then have a chat with Derek. What about Deputy Holloway? Marcus asked. We record everything, video, audio, the works. If Derek makes threats, if he admits to anything, we've got it documented. Then we take it to the state police over Deputy Holloway's head. They worked quickly and efficiently, each person knowing their role. By 9 o'clock, Sarah and Tommy were in Carmen's truck, heading toward Missoula with a bag of hastily packed belongings. Sarah was crying quietly, Tommy holding her hand. You're doing the right thing, Carmen said gently. For both of you. At 10:30, Bear, Marcus, Tom Miller and Rosie gathered at the Patterson house. Tom had brought his camera, Rosie her phone. They stood in the shadows of the overgrown yard, waiting. Derek's truck rattled up the driveway at 11:15, weaving slightly. He stumbled out, a beer can in his hand, and headed for the front door. That's when Bear stepped into the porch light. Derek Holloway. Derek squinted, his alcohol-soaked brain taking a moment to process what he was seeing. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Bear. We need to talk." "I don't need to talk to anybody. Get off my property." Derek's hand went to his pocket, where he presumably kept a knife or weapon. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, and then Jesse, who'd just arrived. 3 large men in leather vests, their expressions hard. "Like I said, we need to talk about Sarah and Tommy." Recognition dawned in Derek's eyes, followed by rage. "You're those biker trash from the diner. What, Sarah send you? That bitch thinks she can—" "Careful." Bear's voice was deadly quiet. "Real careful about what you say next. This is my house, my wife, my family. You got no right. Actually, we've got every right. See, we're citizens, and citizens have a responsibility to stand up when they see someone being hurt." Derek's face twisted. "Sarah's been lying, probably to get attention. She's clumsy, always has been." "Clumsy doesn't leave fingerprint bruises on throats," Marcus said flatly. "You don't know what you're talking about, and you're trespassing. I could have you arrested." "Could you? Let's call the sheriff right now. We've got plenty to discuss." Bear pulled out his phone. Panic flashed across Derek's face. "You're bluffing. Try me." For a moment it seemed like Derek might back down. Then his hand shot to his pocket, pulling out a folding knife. "Get off my property, or I swear to God." Everything happened very quickly. Marcus moved with the speed and precision of his military training, disarming Derek before the blade could even fully open. Jesse was behind Derek in an instant, securing his arms. Derek struggled, screaming obscenities, threatening lawsuits and murder and everything in between. "That's assault!" he roared. "I'll have your asses in jail." "Actually," Bear said calmly, holding up his phone where the camera had been recording everything, "that's you threatening us with a deadly weapon. Tom, Rosie, you both saw that, right?" Both nodded, their own phones out and recording. "Self-defense on our part, and threatening multiple witnesses. That's going to be hard for even Deputy Holloway to sweep under the rug." The fight went out of Derek as quickly as it had come. His face paled as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. "Where's Sarah?" he demanded. "Where's my kid?" "Somewhere you'll never hurt them again," Bear said. "Here's what's going to happen, Derek. You're going to agree to a restraining order. You're going to stay away from Sarah and Tommy. You're going to get yourself into anger management and substance abuse treatment. And if you even think about violating any of those terms, this video and all the evidence we've collected goes straight to the State Attorney General's office. You can't do this. We just did. You've got 2 choices. Accept these terms, or we call the state police right now and you go to jail tonight. Your call." Derek looked around wildly, seeing no sympathy in any of the faces surrounding him. Finally, he slumped, the fight draining out of him like water from a punctured bag. "Fine," he spat. "Take her. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway." The next morning, Sarah and Tommy sat in the small but clean room at the women's shelter in Missoula. Sarah couldn't stop shaking, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Tommy pressed close to her side, his eyes red from crying. "What if he finds us?" Sarah whispered for the 100th time. "What if the restraining order doesn't hold?" Carmen sat across from them, her expression patient. She'd been there when Sarah and Tommy arrived late last night, had helped them settle in, had stayed while Sarah cried, and Tommy tried to be brave. "Derek doesn't know where you are," Carmen said gently, "and even if he did, there are security measures here. Cameras, locked doors, staff trained in crisis intervention, plus Bear is already working with a lawyer from the Montana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They're building a case. I don't have money for a lawyer. It's pro bono. Free. The coalition provides legal services for survivors of domestic violence." Carmen leaned forward. "Sarah, I know this is scary. I know you feel like you're falling apart, but you're not. You're breaking free, and that's the hardest part right at the beginning. It gets easier." Sarah looked at her son, at his too thin frame and his anxious eyes. "How did it get so bad? When Derek and I first met, he was charming, attentive. He seemed like a good man." "They always do," Carmen said softly. "That's how abuse works. They start with love bombing, making you feel special and cherished. Then come the small criticisms, the isolation from friends and family. By the time the physical abuse starts, you're already so worn down, so convinced that you're the problem, that you don't recognize what's happening. I should have left sooner. For Tommy." "Mom," Tommy said quietly, "you were trying to keep us safe. I know that." Sarah pulled him close, tears streaming down her face. "You shouldn't have had to see any of that. You should have had a normal childhood." "We can have a normal life now," Tommy said, with the hope of a child who still believed in fresh starts. "Right?" Carmen smiled. "Yes, it won't be easy, but yes. There are resources, support groups, job training programs. The shelter can provide temporary housing while you get on your feet. And Sarah, you're not alone. You've got an entire community ready to help." Back in Deer Lodge, Bear and the others were dealing with the aftermath of confronting Derek. True to his nature, Derek had tried to file charges against them for assault and trespassing, running straight to his uncle at the sheriff's department. Deputy Frank Holloway was a man in his 50s with a beer gut and the self-satisfied expression of someone who'd spent his career abusing what little power he had. He'd shown up at the Motel 6 that morning, his cruiser lights flashing unnecessarily. "You boys want to explain what you were doing harassing my nephew last night?" Bear, who dealt with worse authority figures in war zones, remained calm. "We were having a conversation with Derek about his treatment of his wife. When he pulled a knife on us, we defended ourselves, all documented on video." "That's not what Derek says." "I'm sure it's not. But facts are facts." Bear pulled out his phone. "We've got multiple witnesses, including civilians who are willing to testify. We've got video of Derek threatening us with a deadly weapon. We've got photos of Sarah's injuries, documented over the past several months. And we've got testimony from the victim herself, along with her son." Deputy Holloway's face reddened. "That's private family business. Assault and battery isn't family business. It's a crime. And if you're helping your nephew cover up his crimes, that makes you an accessory. Are you threatening a law enforcement officer?" "I'm stating facts. And I'm informing you that all of this evidence has been forwarded to the Montana Attorney General's office, along with documentation of your interference in previous domestic violence calls. If you want to arrest us, go ahead. But it won't stop what's coming." The standoff lasted several tense seconds. Finally, Deputy Holloway turned and walked back to his cruiser, slamming the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. "That went well," Jesse said dryly. "He's going to be a problem," Marcus predicted. "Let him try," Bear said. "We've been dealing with corrupt officials for decades. He's small time compared to some of the warlords and dictators we've faced." Later that day, they received a call from the shelter. Sarah wanted to see them, to thank them in person. The group made the hour-long drive to Missoula, pulling up to the nondescript building that served as a sanctuary for dozens of women and children fleeing violence. Sarah met them in a common room decorated with cheerful artwork, most of it done by the children who'd found refuge there. She looked different than she had at the diner. Still frightened, still fragile, but with something new in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or determination. "I don't know how to thank you," she began, her voice trembling. "You've given us a chance at a new life." "You don't need to thank us," Bear said. "We did what anyone should do. But most people don't. Most people look away." Sarah paused, gathering courage. "I want to press charges against Derek. I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." Carmen's face lit up. "That's incredibly brave, Sarah." "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "But I'm more scared of what will happen if I don't. Tommy deserves better. I deserve better." Over the next few hours, they went through Sarah's story in detail. The lawyer from the Montana Coalition, a sharp woman named Jennifer Martinez, documented everything. The escalating abuse, Derek's threats, the incidents the police had ignored. She photographed Sarah's injuries, both recent and older scars that told a story of systematic brutality. Tommy sat in another room with a child psychologist, giving his own account. It was painful and necessary, and by the end, everyone involved felt drained but resolute. "This is a strong case," Jennifer said. "With the video evidence, witness testimony, and medical documentation, we can get Derek charged with multiple counts of assault, battery, terroristic threatening, and potentially more." "What about his uncle?" Bear asked. "That's trickier. We'd need to prove that he deliberately interfered with investigations, which is harder to document. But I've got friends in the state attorney general's office. They'll look into it." The next week was a whirlwind of activity. The Veterans Motorcycle Club stayed in Missoula, providing support and security. They took turns standing watch at the shelter, their presence a deterrent to anyone who might try to find Sarah and Tommy. During that time, the other residents of the shelter began to interact with the bikers. At first, there was fear. These women had learned to be afraid of large men in intimidating clothing. But gradually, they saw the gentleness beneath the rough exteriors. Marcus helped a single mother fix her car, teaching her son basic mechanics. Jesse played guitar for the children, leading impromptu sing-alongs that filled the shelter with laughter. Carmen ran a self-defense workshop, teaching basic techniques that could help someone escape a dangerous situation. And Bear became an unlikely confidant for several women who'd never felt safe enough to tell their stories to a man. He listened without judgment, offered practical advice, and reminded them that not all men were like the ones who'd hurt them. For Tommy, the week was transformative. Surrounded by other children who'd experienced similar trauma, he began to understand that what had happened wasn't his fault. He attended play therapy sessions, drew pictures of his feelings, and slowly started to laugh again, a sound his mother realized she hadn't heard in far too long. One afternoon, Bear found Tommy outside, staring at the motorcycles parked in the lot. "Want to sit on one?" Bear offered. Tommy's eyes widened. "Really? Really? Come on." Bear lifted the boy onto his bike, a massive Harley-Davidson Road King. Tommy gripped the handlebars, his face split by a genuine smile. "It's so big." "Yeah, they're powerful machines. But you know what makes them really special?" Bear tapped the patch on his vest, the one that read Veterans Motorcycle Club, Brotherhood, Service, Honor. "It's not the bike itself. It's what it represents. Freedom. The open road, the ability to go wherever you want, whenever you want, no one controlling you. Is that why you ride?" "Partly, but also because when I came back from the war, I was lost, angry, didn't know where I fit in the world anymore. The club gave me purpose. Brothers who understood, a way to help people who needed it. Like us, like you, and dozens of others over the years. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil. They're fought right here at home, in living rooms and trailer parks and small towns where people think no one's watching." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Bear, when I grow up, can I be like you?" Bear felt his throat tighten. "Kid, you're already braver than me. You asked for help when you needed it. That takes more courage than anything I ever did in uniform." On day 9, Derek was arrested. State police, not local deputies, came to his house with a warrant. He tried to resist, tried to call his uncle, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was charged with multiple felonies and denied bail due to his history of violence and threats. When Sarah received the call, she broke down sobbing. The lawyer, Jennifer, held her hand through the phone call with the district attorney, who promised that the state would prosecute vigorously. "It's over," Sarah kept saying. "It's really over." But Carmen gently corrected her. "It's not over. It's just beginning. Now comes the hard part, rebuilding, healing, learning to trust again." "I don't know if I can." "You can. I did. Lots of women here did. You're stronger than you know, Sarah. That night, there was an impromptu celebration at the shelter. Nothing fancy, just pizza and soda, but the atmosphere was light with relief. The children played games, their laughter echoing through the halls. The women talked and cried and hugged each other, a community bound by shared trauma and shared strength. Bear stood apart, watching. This was why he rode, why they all rode. Not for the freedom of the open road, though that was nice, but for moments like this, when they could make a real difference in someone's life. "Thank you," a voice said beside him. Tom Miller had driven up for the celebration, along with Rosie from the diner, for doing what needed to be done. Someone had to. Most people wouldn't have. They'd have minded their own business. "Then most people are wrong," Bear said simply. "We've got to look out for each other. That's what community means." Tommy ran up to Bear, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Bear, Jesse's teaching me guitar. Want to hear?" "Absolutely, kid." As Bear followed Tommy back into the shelter, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. This was what service looked like. Not medals or commendations, but a child's smile and a mother's tears of relief. This was why they rode. 3 months later, the Montana winter had settled over the landscape, transforming everything into a world of white and gray. But inside the small apartment Sarah and Tommy now called home, there was warmth. The apartment wasn't much, a 2-bedroom in a subsidized housing complex on the outskirts of Missoula, but it was theirs, safe, clean, free from the shadow of violence that had haunted their old house. Sarah had found work at a medical clinic where her experience as a diner waitress translated surprisingly well to patient intake and administrative duties. The pay was better, and her co-workers were kind. For the first time in years, she looked forward to going to work. Tommy was thriving. He'd started at a new school, where his teachers reported that despite the trauma he'd endured, he was bright, curious, and kind. He'd made friends, real friends, the kind who came over for play dates and invited him to birthday parties. He was even learning to play guitar, practicing the chords Jesse had taught him. The Veterans Motorcycle Club had moved on to their rally, but they stayed in touch. Bear called once a week, checking in. Carmen visited monthly, bringing groceries and friendship. Jesse sent videos of himself playing guitar, encouraging Tommy to keep practicing. They'd become family, in the way that sometimes strangers become family, when they show up at exactly the right moment. Derek's trial was scheduled for spring. Sarah would have to testify, which terrified her, but Jennifer assured her she'd be prepared. Derek had been denied bail again after trying to intimidate a witness, which only strengthened the state's case. His uncle, Deputy Holloway, was under investigation by the State Attorney General's office for corruption and abuse of power. Justice, Sarah was learning, moved slowly, but it did move. One Saturday in December, there was a knock on the door. Sarah tensed automatically. Old habits died hard, but when she looked through the peephole, she saw familiar faces. Bear, Carmen, Jesse, and Marcus stood outside, along with several other members of the Veterans Motorcycle Club. They were bundled in heavy winter gear, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Surprise!" Tommy shouted, having been in on the secret. "They're here for Christmas early." Sarah opened the door, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Wouldn't miss it," Bear said, stomping snow off his boots. "Besides, we brought presents." The bikers trooped in, filling the small apartment with their presents. They carried bags of gifts, boxes of food, and most importantly, laughter and warmth. For the next few hours, the apartment was transformed into a place of celebration. They had Christmas dinner in early December, turkey, mashed potatoes, all the trimmings. They played games, told stories, and for a little while, Sarah and Tommy could forget about trials and restraining orders and the long road of healing still ahead. As the evening wound down and Tommy dozed on the couch, worn out from excitement, Sarah found herself on the small balcony with Bear. The cold air was sharp, but the sky was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I never properly thanked you, Sarah said quietly, for saving us, for giving us a chance at a real life. Bear shook his head. You saved yourself. We just helped with the hard part. I don't think I would have had the courage without Tommy asking you for help. That kid's got a good head on his shoulders. He knew when to reach out. That's a lesson a lot of adults never learn, that asking for help isn't weakness, it's strength. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the snow fall gently beyond the balcony railing. I'm scared sometimes, about the trial, about running into Derek somehow, about whether I'm strong enough to do this alone. First, you're not alone. You've got a whole network now. The shelter, the support groups, us. And second, you're stronger than you know. You survived years of abuse, protected your son, and found the courage to leave. That takes incredible strength. I stayed too long. You left when you could. That's what matters. Bear turned to face her. Sarah, I've known a lot of survivors. Some leave the first time they're hit. Some stay for years. There's no right or wrong timeline. What matters is that you're out now. You're building a new life. And you're breaking the cycle. It is breaking the cycle. Tommy's learning that violence isn't normal, that men can be kind and gentle, that he doesn't have to repeat the patterns he saw. You're giving him that gift. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. Thank you for everything. Just promise me something. Anything. Pay it forward. Someday when you're strong and stable and healed, help someone else who's where you are now. That's how we break the cycle, by lifting each other up. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Inside, Tommy stirred on the couch, his eyes blinking open. He saw his mother on the balcony with Bear, saw the other bikers laughing in the kitchen, felt the warmth and safety of their apartment. And for the first time in his young life, he understood what home really meant. Not a building, not a place, but a feeling of safety, of being loved, of knowing that no matter what happened, there were people who would stand beside you. That night, after the bikers had left and Tommy was tucked into bed, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table and wrote a letter. It was addressed to the Montana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, offering to volunteer, to share her story, to help other women find the courage to leave. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. 6 months later, spring had come to Montana. The snow melted, revealing new grass and the promise of warmer days. Derek's trial had come and gone, resulting in a 7-year prison sentence for multiple counts of assault and terroristic threatening. His uncle had been forced to resign from the sheriff's department, though he'd avoided criminal charges. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was something. Sarah and Tommy attended a support group for survivors of domestic violence. Sarah had started speaking publicly about her experience, her voice strong and clear as she told her story. She talked about the warning signs she'd missed, the fear that had kept her trapped, and the moment when her son had found the courage to ask for help. "Don't wait for rock bottom," she told a room full of women in various stages of their own journeys. "Don't wait for the perfect moment. If you're scared, if your gut tells you something is wrong, trust that instinct. Reach out. Ask for help. There are people who will believe you and stand beside you." After one such meeting, a young woman approached Sarah hesitantly. She had a black eye, poorly concealed with makeup, and her hands shook as she spoke. "My boyfriend says he'll change," she whispered. "He says he loves me." Sarah took her hands gently. "I'm sure he does in his way. But love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't leave bruises. And people like that don't change without serious intervention, therapy, accountability, consequences. You deserve better." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know where to go." "I do," Sarah said. "Come with me." And just like that, the cycle continued, but in the right direction. Sarah helped the young woman contact the shelter, get a safety plan, start the long journey toward freedom. She remembered how terrifying those first steps had been, and she held this woman's hand through them the same way Carmen had held hers. Meanwhile, Tommy was growing. Physically, emotionally, mentally. He'd joined the school's music program, his fingers growing more confident on the guitar strings. He'd started volunteering at an animal shelter, his gentle nature perfect for calming frightened dogs and cats. And every few months, the Veterans Motorcycle Club would roll through Missoula. They'd take Sarah and Tommy out for dinner, check in on their progress, and remind them that they were part of a family that extended far beyond blood relations. On Tommy's 9th birthday, Bear gave him a special gift, a leather jacket, child-sized, with a patch that read, "Honorary Member, Veterans Motorcycle Club." "When you're older," Bear said, "if you want to ride with us, you've got a place. But more important than that, you've got brothers and sisters who will always have your back." "Always." Tommy hugged the big man fiercely. "Thank you for saving us. Kid, you saved yourself. You found the courage to ask for help. Never forget that." That night, as Sarah tucked Tommy into bed, he looked up at her with eyes that had regained their childhood innocence mostly. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" "Yes, baby. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be happy." "I am happy," Tommy said simply. "Right now." And Sarah realized that she was too. Not the way she'd been happy in the early days with Derek, when she'd mistaken control for care, but genuinely, deeply happy. Happy in her work, happy in their home, happy in the knowledge that they were safe and loved and surrounded by people who would stand beside them. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks and struggles, therapy sessions and court dates, nightmares and bad days. Healing wasn't linear, and trauma left scars that didn't fully fade. But they had something now that they hadn't had before: hope, community, the knowledge that they weren't alone. 1 year after Tommy had approached the bikers outside the diner, Sarah stood at a podium in the Montana state capitol. She'd been invited to speak at a hearing on domestic violence legislation, and her testimony was helping push through stronger protections for survivors. "People ask me why I stayed as long as I did," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. "They wonder why I didn't leave sooner, didn't call the police more, didn't ask for help, and I understand those questions. I asked them myself for months after we escaped." She paused, looking out at the legislators, advocates, and other survivors in the audience. "But those are the wrong questions. The right question is, why did my abuser feel entitled to hurt me? Why did a system meant to protect us fail so completely? Why did it take a group of strangers, veterans who'd never met us before, to step in and help when so many others looked the other way?" She told Tommy's story then, how an 8-year-old boy had found more courage than most adults ever would, how he'd approached strangers and asked for help, how those strangers had become heroes by simply doing what should have been everyone's responsibility. "We need better laws," Sarah concluded, "better training for police, better resources for survivors, but most of all, we need a culture shift. We need people to stop looking away, to understand that domestic violence isn't a private family matter. It's a crime, and preventing it is everyone's responsibility." The chamber erupted in applause. Several legislators approached her afterward, promising to push the legislation through. More importantly, several survivors approached her, thanking her for speaking their truth. Outside the Capitol, Tommy waited with Carmen and Bear. When Sarah emerged, Tommy ran to her, his guitar case bouncing on his back. "You were amazing, Mom." Sarah hugged him tight, this brave boy who'd saved them both. "We were amazing. We did this together." Bear approached, his weathered face creased with pride. "You're making a real difference, Sarah, changing lives, because you changed mine first." "No," Bear corrected gently. "We just helped you remember your own strength. You had it all along." As they walked to the parking lot where the motorcycles waited, gleaming in the afternoon sun, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten: peace. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of hope. The knowledge that they'd survived the worst and come through stronger. Tommy asked if he could sit on Bear's bike, and the big man lifted him up carefully. The boy's face split into a grin as he gripped the handlebars, already dreaming of the day when he'd be old enough to ride for real. "Someday," Bear promised, "when you're old enough, we'll teach you, and maybe you'll ride with us, helping other people who need it." "I want to," Tommy said seriously. "I want to help kids like me, so they don't have to be scared anymore." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears. Her son, who'd endured so much, who'd been forced to grow up too fast, still had compassion, still wanted to help others, still believed in goodness. That evening, back at their apartment, Sarah and Tommy sat on the couch together. On the coffee table was a photo album, a new one, started after they'd escaped. It was filled with pictures of their new life, Sarah at work, Tommy at school, both of them with their extended family of bikers and advocates and survivors. "Tell me again," Tommy asked, as he often did. "Tell me how we got free." So Sarah told the story, the way she'd told it dozens of times, about a brave little boy who asked for help, about strangers who became heroes, about a community that stood up and said, "Enough." But she also told the part that Tommy was still too young to fully understand, that they'd freed themselves. The bikers had been the catalyst, the support, the protection they needed. But the real courage had come from within, from a mother who'd finally believed she deserved better, from a son who'd loved his mother enough to risk everything, from both of them choosing to hope, even when hope seemed impossible. "And we're safe now?" Tommy asked, though he knew the answer. "We're safe now," Sarah confirmed, "and more than that, we're free, really truly free." Outside, the Montana sky stretched endlessly overhead, stars beginning to emerge as dusk settled over the mountains. Somewhere on the highways, the Veterans Motorcycle Club rode through the gathering dark, their headlights cutting through the night. They rode for freedom, for justice, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. They rode for Tommy and Sarah and all the others like them, the survivors who'd found the courage to ask for help and the strength to build new lives from the ashes of the old. And in a small apartment in Missoula, a mother and son sat together, safe and loved, their future stretching before them bright with possibility. The nightmare was over. The healing had begun. And somewhere, in the heart of America, another little boy or girl who needed help would find the courage to ask, because Tommy's story had shown them it was possible. The cycle of violence could be broken, one brave choice at a time. The end. Author's note. This story is dedicated to all survivors of domestic violence and to the people and organizations who helped them escape and rebuild. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. National Domestic Violence Hotline, USA, 1-800-799-7233, w.thehotline.org. Help is available 24/7. You are not alone. You deserve to be safe.